Hello, pattern readers. In this video, I wanted to cover all of the theories for what might or might not be happening with the character of Elayne in Season 1 of the Wheel of Time TV show. There's a lot to cover on just this one topic, so I wanted to separate it from my episode-specific prediction videos where it might have taken up too much time. There are a lot of question marks where Elayne is concerned, and I wanted to try to cover all of that before I get to my Block 3 video covering episodes 5 and 6, which is where I think Elayne would appear if she's going to be in Season 1. Related to this, I am going to talk about all the characters connected to Elayne's scenes in the Eye of the World, but I'm focusing on Elayne specifically because I think if only one member of the Andoran Royal family makes it into Season 1, it's going to be Elayne. First, before I get into Elayne discussion, I did want to briefly address the news from this week about production on the Wheel of Time TV show Season 1 possibly being halted. And I did want to stress that there is nothing official from Amazon as of yet. I had been hoping they would say something to address these rumors, but we haven't gotten anything from them yet. So we can't be certain about any of this, but I will say that with information now coming from multiple sources, we can make a pretty good guess about what seems to be happening. First, we had WatchSeries.com posting their scoop that more than one source had told them that production on Season 1 had been halted with plans to resume in April 2021. No reason was given, but the reasonable speculation was that this was due to the increasing spread of COVID-19. This was also reportedly not a forced decision, but one the production made on their own. Even before this scoop, there had been some speculation that perhaps principal photography for Season 1 had actually been wrapped when the director for episodes 7 and 8, Kieran Donnelly, made this post about heading home. After WatchSeries.com came out with their news, Narg the Daily Trolloc shared this post from a member of the crew, calling it a wrap, which again raised the question of whether they could have actually finished major production on Season 1. Weaves of the Wheel supported this idea by sharing that they had some sources telling them that production had been doing extra time over the previous 2 weeks in an attempt to wrap and avoid further delays. And Daniel Green put out a video citing a source telling him that the only work left to be done on Season 1 were some pickup shots. Pickups is the term for a relatively minor shot done after principal photography to augment what they already have. With this in mind, any additional production work needing to be done on Season 1 could be relatively minor. And if the plan is to complete it in the spring, that might still allow them to release the show according to their planned schedule. We don't know what that planned release schedule is beyond sometime in 2021. But Daniel Green's source did indicate they did not expect any delays. So overall, this is good news. Precautions are being taken to keep the cast and crew safe, and we're still likely to see the show in 2021. So now on to what might be happening with Elayne. Originally, I was going to keep this entire video as spoiler-free as possible, but I realized that in order to discuss the implications of potentially cutting certain characters from Season 1, you have to talk about their importance later on. So in the end, one part of the discussion in this video is going to include full book series spoilers. I'll warn you when you get to that part so you can skip it if you need to. And the rest of the video will have spoilers for Book 1, The Eye of the World. There are also potentially show spoilers because I am going to get into some of what we know about casting and production that might impact the characters we're talking about today. First, let's talk broadly about what the spectrum of possibilities are for what might or might not have been included for the Andoran Royals. First, we might have all, or nearly all, of the characters that appear in Chapter 40 of The Eye of the World. These include Elayne, Gawain, Galad, Morghese, Garth Bryn, Elaida, and Talonvor. We might have only a few of these characters. We might only have Elayne, or we might have none of them. For each of these possibilities, I'm going to talk about how it might work, what the potential ramifications for the story would be, and I'll look at what information we have from production as it relates to these questions. Since this is only one chapter in the book, you could argue that this is an easy cut. even if we don't have palace scenes, we could still have other scenes from Camelin, and there's evidence that we do in the casting of Darren Clark as the innkeeper of the Queen's Blessing, Basil Gill. And we have to meet Loyal somewhere. They could also still show Rand trying to see Logain and catching a glimpse of him without him actually going into the palace if they were so inclined. But let's talk about what is important in Chapter 40 and what the consequences would be if it were cut entirely or in part. So here come book spoilers for the entire series. If you're avoiding those, skip to the timestamp on the screen. So Rand meets these 7 characters, and several of them are either extremely or fairly important later on. The most impactful of these is easily Elayne, since they fall in love and have babies and all. And since they don't meet again until the Stone of Tear, and have a pretty short-term interaction there while they're falling in love, this first meeting becomes pretty impactful to that plot overall. It honestly probably carries more weight than it really should. Regardless, if Rand doesn't meet Elayne here, he's going to have to meet her sometime, and waiting until the Stone of Tear puts even more pressure on those scenes to land. I'm personally never going to be in favor of cutting a significant interaction between characters who are going to be in a relationship in The Wheel of Time. This is an area where Robert Jordan's writing was sometimes weak. For some of the major relationships, he did not put in enough page time showing his characters falling in love. And the TV show is not going to be able to take shortcuts like that if they want us to care about these relationships. Rand and Elayne definitely fall into this category. After Elayne, there's an argument to be made whether the interactions with Gawain or Elaida are more important, but I'm going to say it's Gawain. There, the personal element to their later conflict is more important. With Elaida and Rand, their conflict is more about the roles that they have. Elaida would try to control any man who was the Dragon Reborn. And with Rand at that point, he would have little trust for any Aes Sedai, let alone the Amyrlin seat. So while I think there's probably a benefit to having Rand and Elaida interact in person at some point, there also might be good reasons to delay that meeting. As for Gawain, in this initial meeting, we see that their inclination is to be friends. I think this is important when we later see that Gawain turns on Rand. It's hard enough to understand why he does this when he has people he should trust telling him not to believe rumors. But having a direct interaction with Rand gives an opportunity for that dynamic to become more personal. If he's never met Rand, it's likely to make even less sense, and also, why should we really care that he believes Rand killed his mother in that case? Arguably, the interaction between Rand and Galad should also be important, given that they turn out to be brothers. Now, the book series didn't really end up doing much with this, but the TV show might want to take the opportunity to do so, in which case this meeting could be potentially important as well. The remaining 3 characters, Morghese, Garth Bryn, and Talon Vor, I would argue never have to directly interact with Rand. There's nothing that happens later that depends on this scene. So while of the 3, Morghese might be interesting, it's also not necessary. So the consequence of cutting all or most of these encounters is that, at least for the few characters I mentioned that might be important, the show would then have to try and figure out a way later on to make those meetings happen in a different time or place. And so things potentially become more complicated if they decide to cut this entire part. But let's talk about why they might want to cut any of it. I can see 2 possible reasons. The first being practical from a casting standpoint. We're talking about potentially casting 7 actors if they filled all of the roles in this sequence. And most or all of them would probably end up being brought back into the story later. So not only is this expensive from a casting standpoint of having to cast 7 actors for what might be limited scene work in season 1, but it also potentially causes logistical problems if you want to be able to use those actors again later, but you don't need all of them consistently. So that provides some incentive to at least limit the number of characters involved in this sequence. The second reason could be that there might be elements to these interactions that they don't want to include for a story reason. The one that leaps to mind for me is Elayne, because the main thing that she does is make a foretelling that could seriously spoil something that they might want to keep in doubt for most or all of the season, and that is, who is the Dragon Reborn? Elayne comes out and says that Rand is dangerous and that he is the center of everything. It's not hard to extrapolate from there to him being the Dragon Reborn. But I expect the show is going to want to have us focusing on multiple potential candidates that would at minimum include Logain, Rand, Mat, and Perrin. And that a reveal, if it happens, wouldn't be until the end of the season rather than the middle of it. The only other potential reason to include Elayne is to set her up as a Red Aja antagonist, but we seem to already have Liandrin filling that role in the first season. So straight away, if it were up to me, I would cut 2 parts from this sequence. Elayne I would cut for story reasons. Eliminate her foretelling, introduce her in the second season, and find some other way for her to meet Rand later on. Talonvor I would cut just because he's unnecessary here. And then I'd probably also cut Gareth Bryn, if again I were concerned about having to hire too many actors and keeping them willing to come back later on. His interaction with Rand is not crucial, and he would be there mainly to provide support to Morghese and to establish that relationship if they're keeping it in the show. If necessary, it's also relatively easy to cut Morghese from this sequence. If you cut the part of the scene with Elayne, then Morghese's interaction with Rand becomes less significant as well. I would only include Morghese in the season if they also wanted her for other scenes, such as viewing Logain or interacting with Aes Sedai to help set up those politics. At the point in the scene where you have Galad going off to get the guards, you could simply have Elayne and Gawain helping Rand escape back over the wall or another way, and he just never gets taken before the queen. So it becomes relatively easy, if they're looking to make cuts, to get 7 actors down to 3. I'd be in favor of them keeping the interactions with Elayne, Gawain, and Galad because I think it sets things up better for later in the series. And these actors could also be used in scenes with the Aes Sedai, since the plan is for all 3 of them to go to the White Tower. This is assuming that Aes Sedai bring Logain to Caemlyn as they do in the books, which I hope they do, because I think the scene where Rand sees Logain is iconic, and I really hope we get to see that, regardless of whatever else they decide to do with Caemlyn scenes. But what if they wanted to limit the interaction to just Elayne? Could that work, and how? This is how I would do it if I wanted to have the interaction with just Elayne. I would still have Rand out in the city trying to see Logain, and I would have Elayne doing the same thing. In this case, she sneaks out of the palace in disguise to try to see Logain rather than just heading to the garden. It would be in keeping for her character, not to mention a very Aladdin, Jasmine kind of moment when she meets Rand. To him, she could just be a young woman trying to see Logain. She could give him a different name, or even if she gives him the name Elayne, he's unlikely to figure it out on his own. They could reveal that or not and save that for later. And again, if they wanted to show her in more than one episode, they could still show her interacting with the Aes Sedai as she is supposed to be heading to Tar Valon with them. Although I'm in favor of keeping Gawain and Galad in, I'm also not opposed to this scenario if it fit better with their overall plan for the season. Keep in mind, I'm not proposing cutting any of these characters from the show entirely, just pointing out that there are good reasons to delay at least some of their introductions, while there are also good reasons to keep some of them in Season 1. Is it possible they could have cut all of the Andoran Royals from Season 1? I certainly can't rule it out, but I tend to think it's less likely given the potential story complications that might create later on. Now, let's look at any information we have on production related to these questions, as well as any theories and rumors about Elayne's casting. In terms of production, we don't have a lot to go on. If you've been following my predictions for episodes 1 through 4, you've probably figured out that I think Caemlyn scenes are likely to take place in episodes 5 and 6. We don't have any known filming locations that I think are likely to be the Andoran Royal Palace. I mentioned Chateau Ploskowitz in my episode 3 and 4 video, but as I've already mentioned, I think it's unlikely that our characters are in Caemlyn at that point, so that seems unlikely. However, if they wanted to do any palace interiors or the garden, those could also have been done in studio. As for Camelin City, I think it's likely that we'll see parts of Prague being used for that, and so it's very possible we will see that. Now to casting theories and rumors. I'm going to cover 4 possibilities in regards to Elayne's casting, from what I consider least likely to more likely. The least likely possibility is a rumor that started a long time ago and then pretty much died out. I've talked before about how Helena Westerman is reported to be playing a character called Layla Ibarra. And when this leak first came out, at that time we really didn't know how accurate leaks were likely to be. And we didn't really know if code names might be being used for characters that hadn't been officially announced yet. So it was a plausible theory at the time, given Helena's resemblance to the character description for Elayne. But I now think this is extremely unlikely for several reasons. Leaks of this kind have turned out to be fairly accurate. For other leaked castings that have names we suspect of being code names, with Steve being the most obvious example, the name is more obviously not a fit for the Wheel of Time. It's very likely that Helena's character really is called Layla Ibarra. Plus, she was around for Block 1 filming, which means she's probably in Episode 1, which Elayne is not likely to be. I'm ruling this one out. The second possibility is that Kate Franz has been cast as Elayne. She isn't confirmed to be in the cast, but she was apparently at least on set and going out with the cast and crew near the end of Block 2 filming. But again, even if she was filming at this time, I don't think episodes 3 and 4 line up with when I expect Elayne to appear in the show. So to me, while again, she may or may not be in the cast, if I had to bet, I would say she's not playing Elayne. The third possibility is probably equally unlikely to the last one, but it might have been discussed less. Izuka Hoyle is in the cast, and she was reported to be playing a character called Dana. We really don't know anything else about the role. I'm mentioning this one because it might fit in with the scenario I discussed of Elayne meeting Rand in the city and perhaps giving him a false name. It would be a fun way to disguise who she's really playing, to announce the character in this way and have it be a surprise when we see the episode. At first glance, she doesn't look a lot like Elayne's description, but she does have blue eyes. And if her hair were lightened up to a strawberry blonde, I can actually kind of picture her in the role a little bit better than I can with Kate Franz. But this is still probably unlikely because the only time we know she was in Prague was, again, for Block 2 filming, and we don't know that she was around for Block 3. So I think this probably makes a fun theory less likely. The last possibility is that Elayne has been cast and it's an actress we have no inkling of yet. This one isn't as fun to speculate about, but it's probably the most likely. It's possible that the marketing department has a batch of casting they're holding on to announce at a later time, and it's also possible there are some characters they're never going to announce, and we'll just see them when they show up in the show. If they were going to announce Elayne eventually, it would make sense if they can announce her along with Gawain and Galad and maybe throw more gays in there as well. The marketing department, again, might want to hold on to some of these juicier bits to use at a later time. There's still a long time before the show actually premieres. So what do you all think? Will we see Elayne in season 1? What about any of her family? If you don't think any of the actresses mentioned in this video are playing Elayne, give me your best fan casting. And as always, like and subscribe for more Wheel of Time content, including my upcoming predictions for episodes 5 and 6.